My question is for Professor Hoppe. I haven't read Pinker, so I'm asking you whether Pinker deals with the problem of making things look better or worse according to the date from which you start your analysis, so that, for example, my financial advisor can show that my investments are doing very well just by choosing the date at which he starts. And does he deal with the fact that, for example, in the United States, it's been estimated that the homicide rate would be 5 times higher than it is if we used the same surgical and resuscitation techniques as in 1960, and then if you consider that in 1960 they'd already improved drastically, and by this means you can show that the homicide attack rate in the United States has gone up by 100 times, if you believe the figures, has gone up 100 times since 1900. And at points in the 1970s, it was 200 times. Does he deal with that kind of problem, and what is the relevant point at which we compare our own lives with the past?
Yes, he does look at various historical periods in European and American societies and claims that the number of homicides sometimes goes up a little bit, sometimes goes down a little bit, but there is that the overall trend is, at least what he claims according to his statistics, is that there's a clear decline of homicide rates, there's a clear decline of that is more pronounced in some societies, slightly less pronounced in others, but that is the overall trend in all societies which he for which he has collected data. Also, the number of hangings, for instance, so number of hangings goes down, the number of people subject to death penalty is going down. He does admit that in certain areas it also went up for a while, points out certain factors that have reduced it again. But his interest is to show long-run developments. I don't know if that answers your question, or was your...
Well, it does answer the question about what Pinker does. I just dispute whether what he's saying is actually true, and whether any sensible person would fail to worry that the homicidal attack rate had gone up enormously over the last 100 years by consoling himself that it's much better than it was in 4000 BC.
Again, you see, what I said was, I take his data as he presents them. I'm not competent enough to judge the validity of all the statistics that he gives. I try to show only that according to his own presented data, that does not make much sense. I have doubts about many of the data that he presents, but that would be an entirely different task for which I do not think I'm qualified to answer that, because that would require extensive historical research, and I'm not a historian.
Professor Hoppe, you made passing mention of Hobbes, and I know that you've gone into further treatment on the Hobbesian myth. I'm wondering if you would summarize Pinker's work, operating out of his depth as he was, as just an empirical repackaging of Hobbes, and if so, if you could offer a further method or silver bullet to drive a stake through that Hobbesian myth.
I think Pinker is even worse than Hobbes, because Hobbes does leave open the possibility that people can throw off the state if the state doesn't do what it is supposed to do. Pinker doesn't even has this aspect. That at any point that there might be a point coming where you have to throw off this. There are many contradictions in Pinker. For instance, the American secession from England, he somehow finds good, even though that is obviously resistance against a state. That contradicts his central thesis. The guy writes in a way that he has a way to wiggle himself out of any type of objection that you make, because he always hedges this way and then he hedges this way. So what I try to do here was to reduce the entire book to the bare essentials. And I'm sure that if Pinker would read something like this, but I also say this, and I also say this. But he can only do this if he just simply forgets about what his central thesis is. Hedging your bets, I think he is quite good at that, to avoid any type of criticism. But again, in that regard, he is worse than whatever Hobbes says, because Hobbes does leave open the possibility, if the state doesn't do it, you are entitled to throw it over and go back to state of nature.